Waikato, welcome to it's a very interesting presentation this afternoon, Spaces of Belonging, Disability, Belonging and Wellbeing. And we're all hooked up with the technology and ready to go, and we have people off-site who are listening too, so that's great. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back into the University of Otago Wellington, in particular, Dr. Esther Woodbury, who completed her doctorate here a number of years ago, and one of the shortest times of any other doctorate student. So, and it was an excellent doctorate too. And her PhD was on disability and mobility and social participation. And I followed her career with great interest. So she's continued as both a disability researcher and an advocate, policy expert and advocate. And I was saying to Esther, I'm working with I'm a director on the Housing New Zealand board, and the work of the Disabled Persons Assembly has been very important in raising the profile of Housing New Zealand, making sure that a higher proportion than ever before of homes are going to be universal design and being able to be available for people with disability. And with her, who's her colleague, Dr. Carey-Ann Morrison, who's a graduate of Waikato, where she completed a PhD on gender, sexuality in the home. Carey and together they're looking at, sorry. Oh, sorry. It's dropped off, sorry. Thank you. I'm reading half a C. Sorry. Carey-Ann's research, I just wondering, sits at the intersection of research and activism to challenging disabling structures and attitudes. So it's a great pleasure to have them along together. Can you please join with me in welcoming them?
Hello, thank you so much for having us. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Yeah, can we hear Carey-Ann?
Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. And Philippa was my very much adored supervisor for my PhD, and the only reason I finished standing, that's for sure. Yeah, so thank you very much for having us to talk about a research project. And just as an aside, yesterday was our 2-year friendiversary, where and we know this because when we met for the first time at a cafe, we were like, I'm into that kind of research, and we were both working for this Philly organisation. So we're like, should we be friends? And we like shook on it. And Facebook just told us yesterday that that was 2 years ago. So that's nice. A random anecdote.
The importance of good relationships within research.
Yeah, and yeah, doing cool projects with people who you get and get you, and that kind of thing.
So I suppose I will just thank you as well for having me today. Oh, is it not working? Yep. I can talk up a little bit louder. I was just saying earlier that it feels quite odd being here within this space and in the capacity as is that better? Yeah. As a researcher and working, because it was only a few weeks ago I was in here with my son as a patient, so it does feel a little bit strange to be here in this capacity, but it's also nice to see smiling faces and people who are really excited to be here rather than sad and sick faces.
And I was going to say, it was quite a weird experience when I was doing my, quite exciting, quite funny, Carey-Ann talking about that, because when I was doing my PhD, I went into hospital multiple times actually, but yeah, I would kind of go from my office in this building, go into hospital. Then one time I was like in hospital, I was like, I really need to just get something off my computer at school. So somebody in the ward like took me in a wheelchair into the like med school, and then I go back again, and so yeah, it's a funny space, this whole disability hospital space. So our project, I can't read that at all because I don't have my glasses on. But so we've talked a bit about sort of, you know, who we are, and actually that it was our relationship and our friendship that sort of partly prompted this research project, because we really like each other, we're interested in the same things, and why is it that it's so easy to think about doing research you know, on this kind of topic? And yeah, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and I think one of the key things about the research, and we'll talk about it a little bit in more detail as we move forward, but you know, our embodied positionality. So I'm a parent. I have a young son, a beautiful young son named Lockie, who's 6, who has Down syndrome. So you know, I'm involved in the research as a parent and an advocate and a feminist geographer, and Esther comes from the perspective of a disabled person. So there's really important political reasons for the research is and the methodology and the politics behind it, as well as us doing research because we liked each other and we thought each other were kind of cool.
It's true, we are.
And then also our colleagues from the University of Waikato, where I did my studies, are involved in the project as well, and they bring the perspective of intersectionality and previous work around belonging and to do with power relations and embodiment and different subjectivity types as they relate to space and place.
And that was around sexuality. Was that right? Yeah. Yeah. So we were both working at disability organisations. I'm actually not working in the disability organisation anymore, but I'm still part of it. Still a member of the like disabled persons organisation, and that kind of stuff. And so we wanted to have a project that kind of meant a lot to the work that we were doing around kind of like trying to make changes in the community around disability, and some of those things are quite kind of practical things, and we'll talk about a bit, which I also see as kind of the social determinants of health. So a lot of the stuff around trying to make movement around housing and education and income and employment and access and all those kinds of things. And I guess we were, I don't know if we took a little bit, should we talk a little bit now about the whole why belonging thing, or should we go, we'll talk about a bit more about, yeah, you go on to the next. Very organised.
So I think one of the things that we realised in some of our initial conversations, and why we thought that belonging would be a really useful concept to explore, was to think about the current discourses around inclusion and exclusion, and how we could actually further that and unpack that and take it in new directions that would push the conversation further. And we were hoping to kind of challenge this simple binary understanding of inclusion. You know, you're either included or you're excluded, and often inclusion is counted by numbers. So the presence of disabled people in public spaces is often deemed to be inclusion, when in actual fact disabled people might be in public space or whatever space that might be, and be included, but not necessarily feel like they belong as a result of a range of discriminatory barriers and attitudes and obstacles.
And I think the thing about inclusion, and it is a really powerful kind of idea, but it's often kind of like, even involved, you know, even if it kind of says it's more than being present, it's about being involved, it still doesn't necessarily get to the core of why some things work and some things don't. And I think that there's this great quote, and it's used a lot, and I think it is really important, which is something like diversity is being asked to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. And like, I think that's been like a big kind of driver of like trying to make inclusion a part of discourse around, you know, the conversation around disability. But even so, like, I feel like it's not enough, and I think that it's really important to be more ambitious. And yes, being asked to dance is great, but it's also kind of, it's sort of the idea of like, it's somebody else's space that you're being invited into. and that it's somebody else's kind of place to be asking people to dance. It's like, well, what about a space where like you don't need to be asked to dance, you can just dance, or that you can ask other people to dance, you know what I mean, that it's actually your space that you're inviting people into. And that was kind of what I wanted from this, you know, this disability organization, and kind of pushing things along, when it's like we have our spaces and we're inviting other people into them, as well as kind of, and having that ownership. And so we talked a lot about kind of ownership of disability spaces, and also ownership of disability knowledge, which I think is really important.
And I think just carrying on with the dancing anecdote is, what does it feel like to be asked to dance, and what does it feel like to not be asked to dance, I suppose. And a lot of that really embodied, that felt, that lived, that subjective emotive material is missing from a lot of our understandings of inclusion and exclusion.
Yeah, or if somebody asks you to dance, everyone's like, oh, that's so sweet, which is often like a response to disability, you know, when disabled people are included. It's like, that is so lovely. And we saw there was a clip recently about some teenage boys who were given an award by one of those kind of 7 p.m. shows, which was all like, look at these lovely teenage boys who are like best friends with this other teenage boy who's disabled, and he's going to some disability thing in Australia, and we think it's so great that we're giving them the cost of flights and accommodation to go over to Australia to go with them to this. I think it was a sporting thing. Usually a sporting thing when it comes to disability, but anyway, like you know, so it's this thing of like, I mean, it's not I just mean this, often that's where you get kind of funding and that kind of stuff. Not a lot of like, that's so lovely that Esther's going to a conference. We should get her friends to go to a conference with her, because it's really special that she's got great friends. So but yeah, just that idea of like you know, it's not, and it becomes this tension of like, it becomes this special thing that somebody has friends, and it's not like, oh well, obviously you're part of the school and you've got friends. It's like, oh, that's lovely. So if somebody's asking you to dance, is it like in the kind of space that you're in, does it become a thing of like oh, that's nice, or is it like, you know, it's like, of course that person would be dancing, of course other people would ask them to dance, and they would ask other people to dance too. I'm really going on this.
So methodologically,
we'll go on, we'll get past that.
Our theoretical framework was informed by feminist, social, cultural and critical disability theory. So we were really looking to challenge and undermine those traditional positivist understandings of research and methodology, and destabilize some of those traditional power relationships. It was Esther and I were co-interviewers, and as I mentioned earlier, it was really important that we were there co-facilitating, sharing our experiences within the research, and as people with differing lived experiences within the research process. And that co-ownership of knowledge. You know, we tried to structure the project in a way that it was driven by the community, and the knowledge was co-owned by them and us as people participating in the research, as well as disability-led organisations.
And part of the thing is that we want to keep doing that, keep talking to participants about how they can be involved and or how they can lead other work. Because also it's their research as well. So we're going to be talking about that soon.
And I think, for me personally, that was really important aspect of the project, was because research continues to be, disability research continues to be led by non-disabled researchers, funding models and institutions and structures. So it was, that was a fundamental aspect of the project. Some of our emerging findings, and we'll go into more detail as we move through, but the way we've kind of come to these at this point is through a spatial analysis. So really thinking about the different spaces that participants talked about, spaces of the body right through to the globe. So home spaces, workspaces, education spaces and dating spaces. and then some of the health and well-being.
We're gonna have a little chat about what.
So there's our lovely team. There's Esther with blue hair, not purple hair. And it's me and my little boy Lockie on his first day of school last year, and I still look at that photo and it warms my heart. And our colleagues from University of Waikato, so Linda Johnston does work around the challenges and spatial complexities of inequalities, focusing in particular on gendered and sex subjectivity. So she's hugely involved in Hamilton Pride. And Robin Longhurst is Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Waikato, and she's a leading feminist geographer internationally and does a lot of work particularly around motherhood. So it's been great to have their contribution and expertise involved as well. Did you want to talk a little bit about DPA?
Oh yeah, so the organisation that sort of my part of the research came from is the Disabled Persons Assembly, which is a disabled persons organisation under the UN Convention. So it's a membership-based organisation, and it's led by disabled people, and the governance is disabled people, and so a community organisation. And I was working there on policy and advocacy and a little bit of research where I could manage to into my work with my enormous staff of two other half-time people rather. I mean, I was very lucky that the board were very kind of but however we had zero cash. So we got amazing support both from Waikato and
yeah, and I'm a researcher at Imagine Better, and we're a collective of disability activists, advocates and allies, and we have a research program which I lead. We also do work in training and education, and I lecture at the University of Waikato as well in the geography program. So I suppose we've talked about a little bit of this already, but
we've already talked about what the project was about and that kind of stuff. So we can just skip right through that because we've already taken lots of time to write down things.
But I think probably one of the key points, maybe just to make down the bottom there, that final point is that disabled people are often considered as not belonging or as being out of place. That was something that we really wanted to unpack and explore further.
And I guess it is that basic thing of disability, which is it's like that the world is built for certain people, physically, systematically, attitudinally, and the disabled people kind of by definition fall outside of that as something different or wrong or all these other kinds of things that perceptions around disability. But they're literally kind of existing in a world that has been specifically not designed for.
So there are our research objectives. I don't know if we need to read them out. So
accessibly.
Yep.
So we wanted to understand the relationship between bodies, impairment, place, and belonging for disabled people. Wanted to highlight the ways in which disability intersects with other forms of embodied difference, such as age, gender, sexuality, and ethnicity. And wanted to use a methodological approach where disabled people's knowledge is central to the research. And I suppose the bigger purpose is to help build stronger communities through a better understanding of our diversity and, for example, be able to kind of also influence other people. So, for example, we could make recommendations on what a lot of people in the disability sector at the moment are working on, which is recommendations around different disability support systems, but a way to kind of talk about people's lived experiences and actual feelings about things, as well as just kind of, funding streams and stuff like that.
And I think that the notion and experience of diversity is really important as well, in the sense that there are a range of impairment types and intersectionality. Experience differs based on different axes of social identity and difference, and that difference is important. We can we don't need to be the same in order to come together as a community. And in fact, it's actually that diversity within the community that's an important catalyst for us coming together.
We've sort of talked about the why, so maybe we can more or less skip over that one as well, because we did lots of rambling. But you see, the rambling had a point, which is how I try to approach rambling.
So,
do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, so our methodology, it was a co-design process, so participants and so disabled people and participants were involved through all stages. So initially that was a process where we as the researchers worked with DPA governance structure to come up with the framework and make sure that all the research resources were accessible and applicable to the community. We decided to have some focus groups, small group interviews, individual interviews, and written responses. So initially we'd come up with a double phase, a double layered methodological approach, but it actually proved, well, it was quite difficult to kind of get people together in the way that we had planned. So we just kept it flexible and adapted it to suit people and the way that they were able to participate. We ensured that the research was community driven, and that is informed by that, the nothing about us without us idea. And as I said, it was co-facilitated by myself and Esther, and we had ethical approval through the University of Waikato Ethics Committee.
Hooray. So the evolving themes, and we want to say evolving because also it's not just us who are thinking about what the themes are that's coming out of it. So we've got a research summary that was sent to participants, and we want to talk more to participants, the sort of things that they got out of it. From the for example, we're having a launch party and we're inviting participants along and that kind of stuff. And we also have lots more analysis of it that we would like to do. So we're just going to talk about them generally, but there's we just wanted to basically give voice to the participants and what they said about it. And I think this is a really great kind of summary of why belonging is so important. One of our participants, Dwayne, said, I don't feel completely comfortable in any place I go to. And it's quite a fundamental thing about disability. And I think that came in a response to we said to him, where would you like to meet? And then we got there and we're like, so do you feel comfortable here? That's why, you said that you wanted to meet here. And he's like, no, I don't feel comfortable here. I don't feel comfortable anywhere.
And that was despite being a regular there, knowing the manager. There were several people that interrupted the interview to have a chat with him.
Yeah.
He was a regular, but yeah, there was still, aspects to that space that just reminded him constantly that actually he did not quite belong.
Mm-hmm. And so, I said, well, do you feel comfortable in disability spaces? Dwayne responded, no, I don't. No, I'm feeling less comfortable, actually. So the more experience with disability spaces he had, the more he was kind of like, yeah, even this doesn't work for me and doesn't make me feel kind of safe or that I belong. And so Carey-Ann asked, in your Pacific community spaces, your disability identity, how does that interact that way in terms of belonging? And he said possibly worse. So it's that thing of if we want disabled people to feel that they belong in spaces and can thrive in them, how do we do it when people don't feel comfortable in disability spaces, in other spaces, and in the world around them? However, there were some times that people did, because all of this is very kind of conditional, there was no kind of this is when, I feel comfortable in spaces, or this space always felt comfortable. It was there would kind of be moments of feeling that people feeling that they belonged, and then other times when they didn't.
Yeah, I think, and that's key, I think, is actually that feeling of belonging is partial, it's incomplete, it's fluid, it takes a long time to build up, but then it is destroyed in a moment. And it's kind of that that journey of coming to feel more in place and more welcome, but then that journey is just can be so abruptly disrupted and destroyed.
I'm just thinking, do you want to read Bernadette? No.
Yeah, so Bernadette, a family member, and so we also interviewed disabled people with a range of impairments, and also family members who had children from a range of ages with a range of impairments. And Bernadette said, the first time I drove there, and she was referring to the Independence Games, which are they're like is it like an Olympic? I'm not entirely sure what they are, but I think it's like a special.
It's a disability focused sporting event. Yeah.
She said, even before I got out of the car, I started crying. I was so relieved. I could see all these people just like us with all sorts of mobility issues and all the rest of it. All these adults around them, helping them and stuff. You don't have to explain anything. You just got completely accepted.
And Jolene said, I really love these pseudonyms, by the way, which people picked. Not everyone picked a pseudonym, but I was like, Jolene, yeah, it was great. I was looking forward to being in a room with you guys. That was the focus group of disabled people and myself and Carey-Ann. I was looking forward to being in a room with you guys for the research, because I don't hang out with people with disabilities very much, and particularly not my age, and how I crave that. So disability spaces could be really, really welcoming. And Jolene said some interesting things about knowing who was going to be in the spaces could make a disability space, could make it feel more welcoming or not, based on, Jolene is actually a friend of mine who was all like, oh, I trust that you're going to run you're going to be in a create a space that is welcoming and feels good.
And I think this highlights that really contested, fluid sense of belonging in different spaces, because although disability spaces could create a sense of belonging for a range of people, they also at times left people feeling out of place and like they didn't belong. And Rebecca says, because I'm invisible and I blend, I get questioned every time I try to be in this community, to the point where I'm just like, why bother?
And Laura also said, in a disability space, there's nothing, though, that sort of signifies me. I feel like I'm interrupting this space, but it's also really hard because I have an invisible illness, so I'm constantly being read the wrong way, and I think I'm just worried about being read the wrong way and feel like people might not be welcoming in that sort of space. So disability spaces weren't necessarily going to be, wouldn't necessarily foster a sense of belonging.
And I think when we're talking about disability spaces, we're talking about spaces that are both created intentionally. So, for example, the research process, that was an intentionally created disability space.
Or the disability organisation.
But also spaces where that happens unintentionally, those fleeting moments of community that might happen. Encounters in public space, and I think this
it's a bit weird to quote yourself in a research, but I was like, I had a really good summary of it. No, the reason I put myself in there is because, well, do you want to do the first one?
So Jolene said, most spaces I look at events or invites and things like that, and there's just nothing. There's just no, you're welcome in the space. We've thought about the fact that not everyone has the same accessibility needs, or that not everyone has no accessibility needs.
And I talked about my experience, and in the quote I said, do you need, I was talking about this encounters in public places where people say to me things like, do you need help crossing the road, or something like that, or just stopping me to grab me really, really tightly and pray for me and not letting go of me, or giving me cash was another example. And so I was talking about all these like kind of encounters that I've had in public spaces about, that kind of can definitely make you feel like you don't belong if you're out in public and someone gives you cash for being being disabled in public, and that kind of stuff, which is a funny story, but we don't have time to talk about it. But actually what I wanted to say is that some of those public interactions changed a lot when I got a dog, which is also one of the things that kind of made me think about this this thing of like, not just about inclusion, but about feeling like I belonged. And I got a dog, and my street encounters completely changed when I got a dog, because there's some nods in the audience. It's pretty exciting. Because suddenly it was like, oh, look at your dog, rather than, are you okay? Or like, or what's wrong with you? Or can I pray for you? It was kind of like, oh, can I pet your dog? And that's a really kind of normal, human, relatable experience for people. So that was really exciting. And also I suddenly belonged in in a park. I was a dog person, and I could talk to people about dogs, and I'm sorry my dog is so badly behaved, but it's a like it's terrible, but like it did make me feel like I belonged, because people were like, oh, my dog's terribly behaved. So, it's like all these things which can add to your sense of belonging, these kind of things that can link you as well.
Just talks and references to school and universities and so on, like, were littered throughout the conversations, and people referred back to their childhood, many years ago, and spoke about certain experiences, and you really got a very visceral sense of how much of a big impact school or their experiences at university had on them. Medi, for example, says, you could either be part of the Learning Support Centre or you could be part of the mainstream school. There wasn't any other way to be or identify. I felt a bit excluded from both. I could have tried really hard to be one or the other, but it didn't feel accurate.
Yeah, so yeah, it's that whole thing of like being forced to, like, being expected to feel that you belong in one rather than the other, rather than that you belonged in both. And Rebecca said that then went to university, used disability support services there, joined a rep group for students with disabilities, did research into what disability was. I found my belonging that way, through finding people in the rep group, and it was quite empowering to take ownership of, yeah, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. So there were ways that people could kind of even if they didn't always feel that they belonged in the wider education space, they could find spaces within that to develop a sense of belonging and confidence.
Yeah, and there were lots of discussions about the medical model still influencing the design and structure of the schooling and the education system, and children being taken out of class to go and do therapy, and there was lots of laughter and the stories about how many times I'm going to use a straw to blow a ball across a table, it's not going to change my impairment.
Yeah.
And that importance of taking children out of class, taking them away from their education to learn and to be cured, to cure their particular impairment.
And so people also, because of the age groups we talked about disabling workplaces as well. So Laura said, no, like even little things at work, like why are you going home early? People just, if you present as well, it's a bit trickier. Workspaces can be quite difficult. I've had to quit jobs because of my health before, or go down to part-time. So yeah, people kind of like not being all like, why should you have any flexibility, or what's going on, when actually, even though people couldn't necessarily tell, there was like a lot of really intense effect of an impairment on people's lives.
Yeah, those able-bodied norms were just built inherently into the structures of workplaces. And Rebecca says, I'll start a new job. Everyone has walked past me like, oh, flash equipment. Oh, why do you have this keyboard? Oh, why do you have this? And several other participants agreed. And she said, it's like, fuck off. So you're forced to out yourself to people you don't even know. And I think surveillance was a big theme within workspaces, and Laura alludes to that there, and so does Rebecca, that constant feeling of surveillance, or practicing self-surveillance in order kind of to manage your impairment and appear quote unquote normal within the workspace. Are we?
We've got 5 minutes. 8 minutes, heaps of time. Should we skip through that one?
Yeah.
Just to talk a little bit about well-being.
Although the relationship and the gendered and sex stuff is really interesting. But
it's super interesting, and it has really interesting kind of consequences for like health and well-being and So obviously this is the School of Medicine, but you know, we're just kind of like how there's a lot of ways in the which this research could have implications for a whole lot of areas in people's lives and in kind of and in further research and in other areas of research. But obviously there's a lot of impact on people's mental health and well-being in terms of their identity, confidence, a sense of self, and consequences around disability and anxiety. You know, I'm really interested in how all of these things play out in the sort of social determinants of health, and lots of really fascinating stuff around housing and belonging, and just and one of the other quotes which I was like, oh, I can't put that in, was about just wanting to be able to just connect with people, and someone being like, oh, let's have a coffee, and then you having to be like, oh, well, can we go to this cafe because it's accessible, and people just being like, oh, and getting really awkward and find it hard. But actually, when you think about housing, somebody else had talked about not ever being able to go to other people's houses. And that's like a really big thing, always missing out on parties, always missing out on all those kinds of things because they couldn't get to anybody else's house. And in fact, their own house wasn't accessible as well. So yeah, all the social determinants of health. But I think it's really interesting to think about disabled people's relationships with health professionals and how these ideas about kind of the disconnect between people and health professionals has huge consequences, and we've seen that in lots of other research around Māori health and Pacific health and all this kind of stuff. So, of course, there's very similar consequences for disabled people's health. Particularly around kind of a relationship that's sort of formed around, you know, the first kind of clinician kind of contact with people, and around how that goes out and clinicians' experience of that. And there's very little training around disability, and for example, with doctors and you know, lots of other clinicians. But then, okay, so that if you need to build trust or rebuild trust, how do you do that in a health setting when there are no disabled people? I mean, there are very few disabled people who get to be doctors or get to be nurses, because there's all these structures which are put in place which make it incredibly hard for people. And I know somebody who's just literally dropped out of med school because she just couldn't. It was so disabling for her. You know, there was no support, and there was no expectations, and there was no flexibility, and I know that, and lots of these other clinical careers as well, not just doctoring, but you know, all of that. We had radiology, nursing, all this kind of stuff. So, and so yeah. So what does it need? How could we change that, basically? And also just around health and wellbeing, there's real need around holistic views of disability and other kinds of health. So there's lots of research around health checks and screening, disabled people not being able to access screening physically, or not being told about it, or not being referred to screening, or sort of and lack of access to like sexual health and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
a lot of
accessible communications. And
are there any other slides, or should we just?
oh, where to next?
Oh, we're having a launch party. We're excited. And it's also going to be a bit of a call to action around our community as well.
Yeah, so we want to keep building the conversation and keep extending it, both between us and also with participants. And we want, you know, ideally participants to be having these conversations with other people out in the community. So there's that ripple effect of discussion that continues. And we're excited about our launch party.
Very excited. As you can tell, we've mentioned it like 4 or 5 times.
And we really want that to be a celebration of disabled-led knowledge and research, and you know, and it to be fun, and you know, create a really cool disability space.
But I'm also really interested to hear from sort of the people that we talked to in these focus groups and interviews about kind of like what would actually, for them to continue that conversation, what would make it safe for them, what would they need? Because it's not just, you know, it's quite easy for us to be like, oh, you should keep talking about this, but you know, like we kind of have platforms, and we have like, you know, we can anonymize stuff, and if you're disabled in very visibly disabled or not visibly disabled, you know, how does that create barriers around continuing that conversation?
And we'll be doing the usual, publications and conference presentations, and also looking at doing some evidence to practice resources. So, really aiming to take the research and the findings beyond the, purely academic spaces. And then hopefully at some point, some extensions to the research that really focus on the diversity of impairment and the uniqueness of people's individual experiences. And, there are certainly limitations to our small qualitative research project. And
self-funded. Yeah.
And we would like to look further at learning disability, a larger Māori project, deaf, Pacifica, refugees and migrants, and ageing parents. And that's just some of the differences.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be able to do that research by ourselves. So would it be like kind of like passing the research on, or would it be collaborating with other groups? Or so we're trying to figure out how we can do that. Obviously, it wouldn't be appropriate to be like, so deaf culture, which we know heaps about, not being deaf at all, sort of thing. So so it's kind of like, is there interest? Is there appetite for that? Who would want to do it? How would we do it? Yeah. How would we fund it? There's no disability research funding anywhere, basically. So yeah, and then kind of like, and then how would we? Is it different research? Is it a continuation of the research? Like, how does it work with others, researchers, and other people?
And just to close and to finish up with the words from Dave, which I think is a lovely explanation of what belonging can mean. Dave says, "To me, belonging isn't seen, rather it is the feeling deep within my heart that this is right."
The end. Relationships. Yeah. Have a read.
I'm just curious, do different kinds of issues show up in the focus group as opposed to the individual issues? And then another just information point, are there any dedicated streams of funding for research on disability?
To answer your second question, no, there are no dedicated funds, streams of research funding money. That's a really interesting question. I think the thing is that when we had people together, there was the opportunity to kind of go, oh yeah, it's that thing where you do get different things from one-on-one. Actually it was two-on-one kind of quote interviews or discussions than you do on kind of wider group discussions. So I guess when it was two-on-one, we could kind of say, oh, what about this? We could kind of ask more questions, whereas like I feel like with the group conversations it sort of flowed more naturally, which maybe brought up stuff that we weren't expecting. So and there was an opportunity to kind of compare people's experiences, whereas we could sort of do that with the smaller groups because we could because I could talk about my experience or Carey-Ann could talk about her experience. So
yeah, there was a lot of laughter and a lot of enjoyment, and a lot of mocking of the abled. It was a really it was an enjoyable process, the bigger focus groups, and I think often you still talked lots, but often there wasn't not space there was so much conversation, people had so much to share that we didn't have to do a lot of facilitating, to be honest. It was just the creation of the space, the opportunity, and people just talked.
Sorry, I'm talking too much. But the only other thing I was going to say is that actually that humour as a form of just creating a disability space was really important. And And even if it was kind of using that humor and then relating it and everyone cracked up, that was about creating even if there weren't other disabled people in the initial space, where some hilarious thing, hilariously disabling thing had happened.
Hi, thanks, Esther and Carey. Great talk. Did you find any difference in terms of the findings between people with different levels of impairments, like people who had some mild to moderate versus people who have overt, like physical impairments?
Well, this is the thing. Like, I think that's quite in some ways, maybe, but in some ways it's like that's quite an external view of disability, whereas like you can kind of say what is moderate and what is severe and what is this and what is that, because I suppose it depends so much on people's experience of the disability or experience of how disabling the world is. And some people the world was a lot more disabling than it was for others, for lots of reasons, whether things like education, being able to kind of get through the education system made the world a lot less disabling, because they could then, they had more money and they could afford to go out into public spaces, or they could afford to get more support. So it wasn't really, I suppose, I think that's in some ways it's quite a medical view of disability, where it's like, and I've definitely had that myself, of people being all like, times when I felt very disabled by the world, people being all like, well, actually you would be classified as moderately disabled. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool, but all of these and these things are happening at the moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can relate to that as well. I've just been reflecting on the process of the needs assessment that happens, and the ways in which, when your child is small, there's no discernible difference between a disabled child and a non-disabled child, which means that you don't qualify for any government-funded support. I remember at the time thinking, I'm not sure that actually reflects my lived reality compared to my friends who have non-disabled children.
Hi, I'm David. You haven't been tempted to compare this community of persons with disabilities with the community that doesn't have those disabilities? None of the remarks you've made seem to be disabled people feel this, whereas other people feel that. Is that essential in your nature of your research? You were just finding out about disabled people without needing to make that step across?
I think that, I mean, definitely it's like, you can't do everything in every research project. I mean, you could, but then you'd never ever finish anything and come to a talk. But I think that, of course, there are things that make everyone feel that they belong or don't belong. And we were kind of trying to talk about that when we described the process to people in the research. We're sort of saying, there can be literal times and places where you feel that you belong, say on Lambton Quay. If you're a man in a business suit, an able-bodied man in a business suit, you might feel really, really comfortable or say Courtney Place, walking along to your work. But then if it's like nighttime and the people around you change and what's going on in the place changes, actually your feeling of belonging there might be completely different. You might be like, oh, I don't feel I belong here because everyone's 30 years younger than me. So of course there are things, but I suppose we were just trying to look at the things which related specifically to disability, which meant that people felt that they belonged or didn't belong.
And really privileged disabled people's voices and experiences, because there's still not a lot of research out there that does that.